Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mission Top. Mission Top is a place where we try to develop philosophia, which is a friendship, a relationship of harmony with Sophia, which is wisdom. But it's also a farmstead and a ranch, and it's also a family. And so we try to combine all those things on this channel. And today we're going to be talking about a book and also bringing that book, the ideas of it, kind of into a synthesis with many of the topics and things that we've been talking about this channel over the last few months. And I thought I should start out by giving you a little bit of an explication of the process which led me to be talking about this book today, because it just occurred in the last 24 hours. And I think oftentimes it's the development and process by which thoughts come together is sometimes as interesting as the very thoughts themselves. And so I'll start out with that. But even before that, wanted to give, given this is a farmstead and a ranch, I thought I should just share something farmsteady and ranchy, in as much as this is a place that is, and a channel again, that is trying to combine not just thinking and ideas, but actually living them out in the real world in a place. And so I wanted to tell you about yesterday. I actually bought my first gun at a store. We actually have some other guns here on the property, more hunting guns and whatnot. But this is the time I've actually bought one in a store. And you could think that, given the title of this thing, that it has something to do with protection and the end of the world and things like that. But instead, it has very little to do with that, and very much to do with the farmstead and ranch. So this is the little gun here that I bought. As you can tell, it probably doesn't look like the biggest self-defense kind of tool in the world. And instead I wanted to share how this is actually I'm going to be using it as a culinary tool, I guess you could say. So this is a 22 Magnum rifle. As you can see, very portable. You can break it down. You can take it backpacking if you want. Just a single shot. And the reason I got this thing is actually for pretty much two purposes. To slaughter pigs, I guess you could say to harvest pigs, and to harvest cows in a way that will most preserve the quality of the culinary product of that pig and cow. And the reason that is because with this kind of round, a 22 Magnum round, particularly if you get a full metal jacket or a jacketed hollow point, you can put a bullet into a pig's brain, which is only about the size of a golf ball. They'll go through just the right amount of bone so it lands inside the pig's brain in a way that will, instantly kill the pig, first of all, but lodge just that bullet in a very, slender entry point into the pig's brain, such that all the rest of the pig is undamaged. And you can even, extract that bullet and then roast the entire pig and enjoy that. And again, this may sound all kind of funny and not related to the topic of this video, but I share it because I see these things as related. The ideas that we share on here related to the way that we actually live them out in the world. And so in that way, in this approach to raising our own animals, then harvesting them, and then using them for a purpose, to use as much of that animal as possible, for example, is a better way of being, a proper steward, I guess you could say, of these animals and of our food processes and whatnot. It's kind of a funny time in the world where I had to work very hard to find just a 22 Magnum rifle. I mean, 22 is not an uncommon gun, right? But today, most gun stores didn't even have any. I was lucky one of my local stores did, but they don't have any of the ammunition for it because, again, we're in this very strange time in the world where you can't even find 22 Magnum ammunition. I've called at least 10 stores around me, and you cannot find that because of I guess, as I've been asking, issues to do with demand in terms of, a lot more people are buying guns and stocking up on ammo, but also supply issues due to COVID and places having shut down as far as their production capacity. So again, maybe some of you don't see that as related to the topic today, But when I'm trying to set out a holistic vision on this channel, and things like this, like the way that you approach your food, and even the choices on how you harvest that food or slaughter an animal, all to me are tied into the kind of the more holistic principles that we're trying to arrive at. But back to the story of how we came to be dealing with this book today. So this Monday, we let out these live streams with a discussion of the cycles of sacred time, and that we find, such as in the year and the week and even the day, and how we can benefit from those cycles and turn the way that we experience life more into sacred time. And also we talked about sacred spaces in that as well. And that came from reading a book that came from a suggested YouTube video by the great YouTube algorithm. And by great, I mean kind of ominous and powerful, because it kind of is powerful, right? It controls aspects of our lives. Look how it influenced mine just right there. This week, I've also been spending a lot of time in the movie Interstellar, because I've been saying that I'm producing a video essay that's going to be released at the end of it. And the whole framing that I'm giving that movie is the end of a world and the beginning of a new world. And so all these things are being related to how this topic came out today. So then yesterday, once again, I was working on Interstellar, again, my mind in this topic of the end of a world and the beginning of a new world. And, that it gets tedious, the things that I'm doing, whether it's recording the sound or working on editing and things like that. You have to take breaks every now and then. And of course, a natural way to take a break in our day and age is you kind of find yourself clicking over to YouTube to see what, the algorithm presents to you as far as possibilities. And yesterday, the algorithm suggested a video to me, kind of right there front and center, from Van Neistat, who I recognized as Casey Neistat's brother. Casey Neistat's a huge YouTube personality that was kind of at his peak about 3 or 4 years ago. And, I was kind of captivated with him and the way that he was making his videos and living his life at the time. So I knew who his brother was. And so I clicked on the video, and that led us to where we are today. And it's worth commenting on, the YouTube algorithm, or algorithms in general, that are so much influencing our lives these days, and the way that, again, a video was presented to me, and it's because of that I clicked on it that we are here today talking about this. And so you see how these algorithms are having direct, tangible kind of impact on the world and the way that we live our lives. I see them as kind of, in a way, kind of demonic intelligences, or almost a certain kind of principality is the word that Jonathan Pajot likes to say, kind of a being, an intelligence that exists there in a different way than we do. But nonetheless in similar ways that we do as well, that can be either kind of a demonic force, or you can kind of train it, you could say, into an angelic force. So I don't know if you noticed with all these platforms, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, etc., if you make wise choices and you train the algorithm, you kind of realize what the algorithm is, this being, and you kind of make friends with it, almost like an animal, like a dog, and you train it, then it can actually come to serve you in good ways. So if you subscribe to the right channels, for instance, and you start clicking on the right videos that actually do have beneficial purposes in your lives, then you'll come and randomly a video that you would have never found by yourself is suggested, right, by this intelligence, you'd say, this artificial intelligence. And so again, I'm talking about this today because that process worked. But you've probably noticed that if you make foolish choices with these algorithms, they can come to take away your agency. So I have a stark example of that, which is, the latest Mortal Kombat movie came out. And so I generally do click on a lot of movie type videos and the things I'm searching for, because, I love to use movies to present the ideas that we're talking about here. And so there were one that came up for a preview the other day, and I clicked on it because I have this strange nostalgic tie back to Mortal Kombat, the original game when it came out as an arcade game that me and my friends played at a gas station, a quarter mile away from my house there in Utah as I was growing up. And we spent a lot of time playing that game, which was controversial at the time because it had these fatalities that were gruesome, ripping out hearts and taking people's heads off with their spines still hanging there and things like that. But of course, to guys in elementary school, 6th grade or 5th grade or whenever it was, this was the best thing ever. And so we mastered that game, and I spent a lot of time playing it. So, I've since kind of given up my video game playing sometime there in early teen years. But nonetheless, those things, these nostalgias kind of bring you back from time to time. And so over the years, if there, I've looked a little bit about what the latest Mortal Kombat game looks like, which of course have only gotten more gruesome and more kind of over the top in that way. But I click on this trailer the other day when getting back to the algorithm, and watched it just to see kind of what they were doing with the story and where it had gone from 30 years ago or whatever, from when I was playing it, or almost 30 years. And lo and behold, like the next time I come on YouTube, there's like 5 Mortal Kombat videos there all presented to me. And one of them is of the latest version of the computer game. So, I was kind of curious, clicked on that, and, you get where I'm going with this. The next time I come on YouTube, the whole thing's Mortal Kombat movies and games and things like that. And I've kind of, introduced, brought out the demonic side of the algorithm, if you will. And so I have to retrain the algorithm there's ways, thankfully, you can say, like, I'm not interested in these kind of videos anymore. Never show me a video from this kind of from this channel ever again. And that's the way that I've handled Facebook as well. For instance, like I have a Facebook account and I have one that has no friends on it. And I've only gone and subscribed to a few places, like here in Montana, that have to do with useful things, a hair sheep association or a Montana foragers group or something like that, so that, the algorithm is in trying to choose who I am, will only produce the things that might be useful. But even then, of course, these algorithms are great at putting in a random animal video or something that you just can't help but click on, and again, pretty soon you've got 10 animal videos there in front of you that you can waste a whole half an hour watching. So I put that in there just to show the process by which we came to be talking about this video today. It did come from a suggestion from the algorithm, a good one, but just to remind us how much these things are bound up with our lives now, and how much we can either put them in our service. We can train these algorithms with wisdom, you could say, and correct choices to serve us, or we can find ourselves turning them, unleashing their demonic forces, and we find ourselves very much in service to these algorithms, kind of as minor gods that we are then serving, right? But all that said, let's get back to the actual topic at hand. So this video from Van Neistat, which it was, I want to make sure to, give people the proper credit. So let me pull it up here on my computer just to make sure that I give you the proper title, since I don't have just a link ready. So 1 second here.
The spirited man.
All right,
no.
This channel is automatically playing. Okay. The video is entitled, "We Are in a Fourth Turning. What Does That Mean?" So I very much recommend you check out this video because it not only kind of gives a good summary of what we're back to talk about, but he is a very effective storyteller in terms of, or presenter in terms of how he does this in a video, using just a little bit of music, using a clever presentation, using his voice, etc. So I just wanted to make sure to recognize his, the time and effort that he put into this, that also led to us talking about this today. So he is talking about this book, The Fourth Turning, which comes together then as a very good synthesis of so many things that I've been thinking and talking about, and gives us kind of new concepts to bring into the way of understanding what's going on in the world and how we might respond to it. I've heard some of the concepts of this book before. That's why, right as I got into the video, I'm like, yes, I've seen people refer to this, but I didn't have the title in my head, and I can't believe it's taken this much time for me to kind of fully encounter this book or have it recommended by somebody that I kind of trusted, such that I would read it. So once the video was done, I immediately went and bought it, and Amazon, kind of gave me it lets you sometimes read the initial part of the video on a Kindle before the physical book even comes. So I read that last night, and again, here we are then now talking about it. So let's get into this actual book and what it says. Because it's extremely interesting, very mind expanding, and will shape the way then that you're going to look at the world if you've never encountered the ideas from it before. And it's also very important to note that this book was written in 1997. So I was in high school at the time. We kind of talked about what the world was like at that point. In many ways, this kind of it was going through a lull and kind of a time of peace in the world, but a peace that was based in kind of the disillusion of our values, a peace that was based in, time of water parks and Slurpees and, kids like me, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Star Trek: The Next Generation and things like that. Not all bad forces in those, but definitely some of the things that would kind of set up the disillusion. Well, I guess I should say this: like at the very same time that those things were happening, some of them positive, some positive visions of the future, like Star Trek: The Next Generation and whatnot, which had come about there in the early 90s. You also had things like the Bill Clinton scandal in the presidency. You had O.J. Simpson and that whole thing, which kind of really captivated the nation. You had LA riots. You had a number of these other factors that when you look back at the time, we're leading into another period of history, I guess you could say, that really started there with 2001, September 11th, and the Iraq War in there. And it's just still, we're in this period, which is called, in the terms of the fourth turning, a crisis period. So that was when this book was written. And kudos to the authors of the book, who very much, I think, show us a wisdom and a prophetic kind of vision of the world and how we should interpret it. Okay, so as far as kind of the basic concepts of the book, basically this is a book about presenting to us the power of seeing the world through cyclical times and cyclical patterns. And there's one cyclical pattern that they pull out in particular called a seculum. And it's based on the time frame of a human life. So the time frame about 80 to 110 years. And they, through great pains in the rest of the book, which most of I haven't even read, try to show you through historical events why this is such an important cyclical pattern, and how how we can see it there repeated over and over in history, and why this pattern is important. Okay, and so this basic pattern can also be divided into other kind of patterns, and the most fundamental division, they say, is it can be divided into kind of two periods: a period of creation in this pattern and rebirth, you could say, and a period of dissolution and destruction. And already, if you've listened to me for a time, you should, that should be putting off alarm bells in your head of, that's the basic pattern of life, right? Creation and rebirth, followed by dissolution, leading to destruction, which leads then to, creation and rebirth. Again, these are cyclical patterns. But they also show how this basic pattern, can be divided into two, but also can be divided into four periods, much like the seasons. And if you start looking back at the world, you'll see that we very often divide things into fours: the four cardinal directions, the four seasons. There's four rivers flowing out of Eden. Like they literally give dozens of examples in the book of how four captivates us as a way of understanding the world as well. And so the four periods that they carve up this period of a human lifespan of roughly 80 years or so into they refer to as the first period being a high period, the next one being they call the awakening, the next one they call the unraveling, and the last one they call the crisis period. And so let me pull up the way that they describe each of these kind of key periods of this grander important period in that of cyclical history that recurs. So they say the first turning is a high, and so they call each of these 4 periods a turning, and again they're roughly 20 to 25 years. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, when a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. And you can see this is tied up with creation, this is tied up with a new world, you could say. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. So you still have the main value regime, but there's already, right here kind of in the beginning part, there's already the beginnings of a new values regime that kind of challenges the old. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new value regime implants. And then the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Okay, so where it gets really interesting is saying now let's take these concepts we have of this 4-period cycle and let's map it back onto history and see if it actually fits, if it seems to tell us something, if it is indeed a useful pattern of history. So when they wrote that book right there in 1997, they claimed that they were in a period of the third turning, which is the unraveling. Okay, and they kind of predicted that this unraveling was basically coming to an end, and that the fourth period, the crisis period, would begin somewhere in the next 5 or 6 years. And so that would have been, if you then map it onto history, something like the 2007 or so downturn in the economy, the Lehman Brothers, the financial meltdown period. That would have been the start of the period of crisis. Which we are now still in this period of crisis, perhaps with a ultimate culminating event of crisis due, either now, which maybe you could say COVID was it, but we're going to look at the other main crisis periods of these past cycles, and I'm not convinced that COVID was it. It's probably something bigger. So that's kind of the big takeaway from this book, is they're saying in cyclical patterns of history, we are at the end of a crisis period where we're due for a grand, very usually destructive crisis that then leads to a new world starting sometime like in the 2030s. You could say was when a whole new seculum, a whole new human lifespan period of 80 to 100 years, a new world, you could call it, would then begin. Right, so you can see the interest of this book. They're predicting something, and it fits fairly well as far as you could say, like the financial meltdown of 2008 could be seen as the beginning of a new period in which we've had some of the more crisis things going on in the world compared to the past, with other financial meltdowns, with COVID, with the presidency of Donald Trump, with all the breakdown of society and the falling, the loss of trust in institutions, with COVID, etc. And it doesn't feel like it's done, right? It feels like we're maybe right now at the beginning of this Biden presidency just in another little lull, and something else big could perhaps be coming, right? And so if with that there in kind of the way that we conceive things, we used to say, well, what was these big crisis things like as far as these other 80 to 100 year periods? And that's where it gets a little scary, right? Because the way that they're setting up this timeline, the last big crisis that led to the end of a world and the beginning of a new world would have been World War II, right? Where and you think of the millions that died in that war, in that culmination. And if you go back 80 to roughly 80 years from that, what do you find? You find the Civil War, right? And you go roughly 80 years back from that, and you find the Revolutionary War. All basically in about these periods, and then they try to show how the intervening periods can also map on to these turnings that they call, again, the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. So starting back with World War II, looking at the high period, that would have been kind of right there post-war, leading into the early 60s, where again there's prosperity, there's kind of a new world that is just getting started. There's a positivity associated with things, then leading to that period of the 60s when a new values regime was kind of put in play to challenge things and start to kind of grow in the ensuing years. And that would have been the 60s and 70s leading up to the early 80s. The unraveling they would have put in the about 1984, leading up to mid 2000, 2000, the aughts, mid of the aughts, you could say. And then this crisis period from then up to right about now, or early 2030s, as would be when the you would predict the end of this crisis period, right? And so the other interesting thing to see in this is that these turnings periods also correspond pretty well to generations, I guess you could say, because roughly 20, or it doesn't have to be perfectly 20. None of these things are seen as mathematical kind of precision, but more rough periods. But 20 to 25 years, that's usually around where a new generation of people kind of emerges, as far as kind of how regular cycles of human productivity work, right? And so each of these four turnings also maps on pretty well to a group of people that was born in that turning, and the people born in that turning tend to have kind of a fairly collected worldview, I guess you could say. And so the generations that kind of map onto to when they were born would be in that high period. The boomers were born. And of course, if you're born in that period, you're not influencing so much that period. So the boomers were born in the high period, and they grow up in that period, but then they come to influence more the ensuing periods, right? But it's important to see that the boomers were born in that high period. The Gen X then was born more in that period of awakening in the 60s and 70s, right? The millennials are then born in the what's it called? The disillusion period. Sorry, the unraveling period. So that would be me. That would be probably many of you that are listening to this. Yesterday, I was kind of making the case that I think I come from a kind of in between generation that doesn't quite fit into either one. The Xennials, as they've been termed. And then Gen Z would be the generation that is growing up in this period, in this last period of crisis. And so he also has some interesting archetypes that correspond with the type of kind of personality, you could say, that in general corresponds to these generational periods of turnings because of when they grew up. So with the boomers, he gives that initial period that is tied in with, again, that high period. He says that their archetype that kind of follows them throughout their lives then is the prophet. Okay, and so that, like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, Van Neistat points out, are could be seen from that prophet generation, and the way that they saw computers as the next thing that would influence the world in a profound way. Gen X then would be tied into the archetype of the nomad, which I guess kind of starts trying to fix the unravelings that start happening with the awakening generation, that starts challenging the basic norm scheme. And then the millennials are given correspond to the hero archetype. Okay, so as far as the millennials, how things have played out thus far, you could probably argue that hasn't been realized to a big way. But it's important to also notice that there is something that fits to that in terms of the idealism, right? I definitely feel that the idealism of the millennials and the way that you look at the world, somehow from growing up in this period of unraveling. And then there is finally the group that grows up, which would be Gen Z, that grows up during the crisis period, ends up being more an artist archetype, because they're going to have most of their impact then in the world after it's turned over, right, into this high period, or into the awakening period. And so they're more the artists that will influence those coming periods, right? So it's important to note with these archetypes, they grow up in a certain period, but it's not necessarily, they are not going to be, it's more their archetype then is going to influence, the subsequent periods, because when they're growing up, they of course aren't having as much influence on that period, so the millennials and the hero period aren't going to be influencing as much that period of unraveling that they're growing up in. It's going to be more in that period of crisis, that hero archetype is really going to be seen and leading on into the subsequent generations. And the way you can really see this is that I think the last one that was like this was the generation that fought in World War II and is oftentimes referred to as the greatest generation, right? And so that's kind of the one where you see, oh yeah, I do see that hero archetype in that group of people. They're the ones who lived through the Depression, but then also went off to war and won World War II and kind of started that new world. So it corresponds very well with them. Nice to see Sigvard and Joel and Martin and Farzad and all on here. So welcome, gentlemen, and I'm glad you could join us today. And welcome any ladies that are also out there as well, who of course are always welcome on here as well. And yeah, as usual, please participate in any way that you feel inclined to. It always helps me just to know what you're thinking about and be able to kind of interact with you more, instead of just present to you. So I always welcome that. Thanks for being here. So let's kind of start taking this from just seeing what this book presents to actual application. What should we do about it then? How can you use this book? How can you use these concepts? So the first thing is to realize this only reinforces this thing that we've been talking about this week, especially on Monday, this notion of cyclical time and its importance in the development of humanity. The authors point out in the book that there have in general been three kinds of time that humans have defined, that you can put into three main categories throughout history. Chaotic time, and I guess some very much more, what would you say, Stone Age or Aboriginal societies have more of this notion of time in there where again there's just a chaos to the events of the world. There's no continuity and there's no building on each other. Everything is just a randomness. And it points out this is much more how children, for example, probably experience time as it's playing out in the world. They don't see the connections between things in their life, and that's why you see kids can become very frustrated when it's time for an event, it's time for bedtime, or it's time to go to the store, and this seems as something out of nowhere for them, a random thing, and it can throw them into disarray because they don't yet have the continuities and the connections of what's going on in their life in order to understand kind of the next kind of time, which is the time that has probably predominated most of what we can see, even of historical humanity, and that is cyclical time, right? The time that we've been talking about is very bound up with sacred time, but these cyclical time is the time of cycles, just as it says. The cycles of the year, the cycles of the day and the night, right? The cycles of the seasons. And so many religions and societies base themselves off of these cycles, and they're kind of identifying the cycles and then understanding them and then ultimately celebrating them, turning them into sacred moments of meaning as they learn to kind of interact with the cycles and anticipate the next cycles and realize that there's kind of two aspects to the cycles. There's a very reassuring aspect to the cycle because it means that no period is ever going to just be forever. The worst thing would be to be stuck in a winter, cycle or part of the cycle forever, right? But on the other hand, there's something that is also kind of a prison to the cycle, because then you're, in a way, you still are stuck in this cycle forever, and you can't get out of it. It's bound to recur again. So you can see there's a positive and negative, kind of a reassuring notion to a cycle, but also a prison-like aspect to a cycle, and you'll see that in these cultures, which is why, over time there developed another notion of time, which is the linear notion of time that we are more familiar with. And it's a line that either could be seen as starting at a certain point, kind of like a creation of time with like a Genesis narrative that then goes on in an arrow, forward, and maybe even has an ending point. There's a notion of the end of time. Or some notions of time is that time extends in a line ever backwards, right? And doesn't have a beginning. It's, there's an infinity of time going backwards, there's an infinity of time going forwards, but it's a line nonetheless, right? And again, this linear time seems to have been heavily developed or definitely articulated more through the Hebrew narrative, where you get this notion of leaving a tyrant and heading out towards the promised land, right? So there's a departure and a destination out there, and very much this is the notion of time that, especially since the modern era, kind of starting there in the 1500s, has come to dominate the way that we think about the world, as always this effort to head towards a progress, right? And head towards a greater ideal, and that all things just kind of naturally flow in that direction. And so each of these, I hope you can see, like, there's a reason why each of these notions of time were developed. They're all true in a way that you could find them out there in reality in a certain way. But if you get stuck in any certain one, then bad things can happen. And so the book actually takes time to show how, we've gotten so stuck in linear time, where we always are just kind of, our eyes in the future trying to head towards something, that we discount the value of the past. And the value of the past comes from more the nature of cyclical time. And it points out that, the ironic thing about linear time is there's no way of even defining linear time without cycles, right? How do you even define time itself unless you do it by periods, and periods are cycles? And, it's a period of the revolution of the Earth, and the period of the orbit of the Earth around the sun, right? Those kinds of periods, the periods of the seasons. That's how you actually even if you're in linear time mode of thinking about things, you're still defining time by cycles. And if those cycles are there, and if the cycles of the seasons are there, well, you should look back into history and see that human events happen in cycles, and that the world is bound up in reality is also bound up in cycles. And so that shows that the value of history is great, because if you can look back and discern the cyclical patterns in history, then you can start to see where you might be in the patterns, and there you can start to kind of prophesy where things might be going in the patterns before they happen, such that you can more effectively act wisely in anticipating those patterns. And this is kind of where we'll take things and ultimately kind of ride the patterns rather than be swept away by them. Okay, so if you apply this to the book, you can see very much how this is exactly what he's trying to present. Let's get back to seeing the value of cyclical time. It doesn't mean that linear time is bad. There's something about that that's here to stay, right? With linear time, you realize that there's kind of a progress and a there's also a disillusion, or things can get worse. Things can either get better or worse. That's kind of a notion of quality and of progress or digression to something. And so the way I see it is to as usual, if you know me, is to take all these notions of time and say we need to be able to inhabit and comprehend each of these notions of time at the same time. The world is operating in cycles, but if we also see the linear nature of time, we can try to get those cycles working towards a greater ideal, right? And we can try to ride the cycles so that we get them working towards for us towards something better, towards human progress rather than human suffering. Let's see, Joel, you come on here saying, I'm thinking that a spiral mode of time would be the most accurate as it captures both the circular and linear forward or upward movement of time. Yeah, perfect. And guess what? They mentioned that, and I'm glad you see that. And I've kind of seen that as well. There's a great image, a painting. I'm not even sure what time period it comes up, that sees Jacob's ladder, which oftentimes is shown as a ladder, and which I guess correctly translated, Jacob's ladder is supposed to be kind of more of Jacob's ziggurat, more of like a temple kind of thing, a staircase, but as part of kind of a ziggurat temple. Well, it sees that ladder in turn instead as a spiral staircase, something more like DNA kind of looks like, right? And so I think that's a great way of seeing it, that you should operate in cycles, but trying to get those cycles headed into the direction that you want them to go. So there's both a sense of direction and a sense of cycle, exactly what you're saying, a spiral towards something. Okay, so let's go even further with how we then apply all these principles to ourselves today. We've talked about how we need to see both the linear nature and the cyclical nature of time, and I'm going to try to put in some other images into your head that kind of get both of these operating together. So we have the spiral, like a spiral staircase, but also think about the Hebrew story. I was thinking about it just this morning as I was running out with my dogs in front of some mountains. So the Hebrew Christian story in Genesis, I think properly understood, starts things out on a mountain, this mountain of paradise. And again, the Garden of Eden is not like described particularly as a mountain, but it has the 4 rivers flowing out from it. And in Ezekiel, in referring to the Garden of Eden, it refers to it as a mountain. So, you're on safe ground if you're a Christian or Jew to see the Garden of Eden as a mountain. And so humanity is seen as starting there on the mountain, right? And then there's this notion of falling away from the mountain, going down the mountain, which takes you away, down and away from the mountain when, they partake of the fruit and are cast out of the garden. And then the narrative is all about trying to get back to the tree of life that was there, like at the top of the mountain. So there's this notion of ascending back up the sacred mountain. Again, and if you kind of picture that, just in the course of like time, you're up high, you go down into a valley, you could say, and then you're back up again, as if you're seeing it chronologically. And so now see that not just as a start and an end, starting up, going down, ending back up, but then carry that out as a pattern, right? And what do you have? You have a wave-like pattern, okay? And so, that's what is a wave? It's another way of seeing like a cycle. If you've kind of, I'm not huge into physics or mathematics and things like that, but just hearkening back to school years, how waves can operate like continually, and they're cyclical in their nature. Okay. And so that fundamental pattern just keeps on recurring again and again. This notion of starting somewhere, going away from it, and then coming back to it, and then throwing in the cyclical nature of things, repeating it again. You see that in our pattern of breathing, right? It's a breathing in and a formation. You could say that's going up to the high point, and then it's a breathing out and away. But these main patterns of the world always just keep on happening. You can see it in the waves of the ocean, right? In the way that they just keep on undulating, keep on coming and playing out. And so with those notions of there's something about that. There's something about that pattern that, and again, you can see it also in a circle as far as a cycle, but I think that wave-like pattern is also very valuable to see. If you can kind of have that as an image and a symbol, let's say, then that pattern right there seems to be in like everything in reality. It seems to be like the fundamental pattern, as far as I've been able to tell of reality. So looking back at the fourth turning, he's saying that's the main notion of this cycle, is that you start with the creation of the world, right, at the beginning of one, like after World War II. There's that creation of the world, and then there's kind of this slow falling away, from that creation, leading up again to an eventual kind of wave coming, you can say, where a new world is begun. And that process of destruction and beginning is right there, kind of bound up with each other into one kind of thing, very much like a wave's coming. And so as I was thinking about this morning, because two images were right there in my mind, this notion of waves coming in on a beach, and then I was looking up at this mountain range, and I think that's probably one of the things that strikes us about mountain ranges. This wouldn't work with a volcano as much, kind of, but mountain ranges definitely, they're usually shaped like waves, And I started thinking about it, like, what are two things that humans, for no obvious reason, love to do? And that would be to surf. And you listen to surfers. I'm not a big surfer, but you listen to surfers and the way that they talk about it, the way that it's a spiritual activity about riding the wave, right? And then you find people climbing mountains. And why do they do it? People can't explain. They just feel inclined to climb the mountain and then come down again. And then another day they go and climb the mountain again, and then they come down again. And some people even like to ski down the mountain. There's a sense that they climb up the mountain in order to ski, to ride that wave, even though the mountain is, kind of the stationary wave. I'm like, maybe there's something to that as well. Like, we naturally see patterns in the world. We are pattern seeing and pattern making beings. So when people are doing those things and reporting them as profound, meaningful activities, surfing, climbing mountains, is it because they in some way recognize that they're kind of living out this fundamental pattern in a productive way? Because think of the surfing. I think you really see it well in the surfing. If you're not there, and as I understand surfing, you kind of have to be able to read the patterns, first of all, understand the wave that's coming to you and the nature that it's coming to you. You have to anticipate it, and you start your actions right before the wave has arrived to you, in order that when the wave arrives, you are actually going to be able to ride on top of it in a way that you control and actually harness the power of the wave in a way that brings about not only that flow state and of being on the wave, but takes you to where you want to go, in essence, right? And so you think about, if the world is operating in patterns like this, the pattern of the day, the year, and these patterns like are pointed out in this book, like in history, well, of course, that's where you'd want to be, right? You'd want to be the individual that can ride the waves of history, rather than as like an Interstellar. If you remember that movie, you have these waves, as high as skyscrapers coming and completely destroying you. That would be obviously what you wouldn't want in terms of the wave. And anyone that's been in the ocean knows that, that's a possibility too. If you're not paying attention, boom, a wave can come in and just wreck you, right? And knock you over. And so that right there then led me to think of the Noah story, because it's very much the same thing. The Noah pattern, as I like to talk about it. Noah, he reads the patterns going on around him, and he comes into this relationship with God, which I've talked about in a different video. I see as kind of one way to see that is that he builds this relationship with reality, in as much as God can be tied into reality. And he learns to walk with God, right? To understand the patterns of reality and to be able to kind of, walk with them, have this filial relationship, this harmonious relationship with the patterns of reality. And in so, he can anticipate, reality tells him, hey, there's a flood coming, You could say there's a wave coming. And so what do? You prepare, you put your things into action before the main part of the waves actually come here, and you start moving kind of along with the waves so that when it comes, you're actually riding it. And there's the arc. You can see the arc on top of, the flood. You are on top of it, whereas everybody else that was just kind of oblivious to the pattern, boom, is washed away by it, And so, these are such basic patterns in our lives, but at the same time, so profound because it's so true. I mean, I feel truth in that. That's how life actually plays out, okay? And so, as I realize that without realizing that's one of the things I've tried to focus on in my life is anticipating what's coming. And then, just like a surfer, trying to put your life into a pattern where as those things come, you'll be all right. You'll be on top of the fray. I give an example of that, just like with COVID, because it's such an easy example. Like with COVID, if you were just paying attention to what was going on in Asia, right, and just think for 2 seconds about the nature of disease, you were like, there's a very good chance this is going to come to where I am. And it's all shut down over there in Asia. You could see it weeks in advance, there in China. And already there was cases like in Washington. And so you see that and you say, a wave seems to be coming, right? And so, it was very easy to see the pattern. I'm not trying to say I'm great because I saw this pattern, because it was right there. It's a pretty obvious pattern. And so where was I? I was in Costco that week, showing up, making sure we had enough food, because the ultimate nature of this wave is unknown. So you want to be prepared for whatever's coming. And there was no line at Costco. Nobody was there. It's crazy to me because I'm like, I guess everybody else has everything they need. And of course, 2 weeks later, as the disease gets much more, ignited, like in the United States, then you get those Costco runs and lines out the door, and all the toilet paper's gone and all that stuff. And so I give that as an example just to say this isn't rocket science, right? You pay attention in life and you can see the things that are coming, and that there's also prophets out there, like the guys writing this book, that are good at pointing out to you the general patterns, so that you can look and say, okay, as you read this book, what I read and say, yeah, we've been feeling this. This just reinforces the notion that it feels like we're at the end of a world, right? Which would be one of these big seculum 80 to 100 year periods. And at the end of these periods, something big and cataclysmic usually happens, right? And in as much as you look at American history, the Civil War was a lot more destructive than the Revolutionary War. And World War II was an awfully lot more destructive than the Civil War, right? And so what could come next? Well, obviously we have the ability to exert so much destruction in the world, and I hope it doesn't come to that, right? I hope in some way humanity itself is learning to ride these waves a little bit more, but there's absolutely no guarantee of that. So what do? You try to do what you can to anticipate what this wave could be, and put your life in line with it. And a lot of people, do that, right? There's kind of right and wrong ways to do that. There's ways that look kind of, that just rub you wrong. That's like the prepper that goes too far in the wrong directions with an aggression, and everything's just a fortification and a battlement kind of thing, and that's their notion. But they kind of miss things. Maybe it's going to be absolutely impossible for them to stay where they are. So they've invested these millions of dollars or however much they put into it in building this compound and this and that, and maybe they won't even be able to stay there. They've got to be able to move along. And maybe the nature of the wave is much less a thing. It might not be bullets and people trying to come and take your food, as much as it will depend on your ability to interact productively with other humans out there, in order to survive. And if you're kind of this hunkering in your bunker kind of person, and you put that up as your whole thing, then you're not going to benefit from the interactions with other people that could come, and things like that. I'm just trying to point out that, of course, there's right and wrong ways to do this. And so I, of course, can't tell you what that is for you. For us here at Mission Top, we're trying to do a number of things, and I hope you feel that, it's not like we're trying to escape society, and it's not like we're trying to armor up and prepare for for battle. Although, I think it is good. It is a good thought to have some defensive guns around in a lot of places. I mean, again, you have to make that kind of decision, but that's completely legitimate as part of your preparation. But there's so much more than that. There is food sovereignty and being able to generate your own food, being able to have a myriad of basic skills and develop those amongst your peers and your community, so that you have a lot of the basic skills you need in case societal functions start failing, that you understand basic processes of nature, of food generation, but of energy generation and things like that you understand basic survival skills in case you have to move from where you are. A lot of times in these times of the world, people have to leave everything and go somewhere else. And do you have those skills to move your place and know how to survive on just the essentials? There's that. But I think far more important is of what we're doing here at Mission Top is we're already trying to anticipate just kind of like the Noah pattern and say, what should this new world be? Because hopefully you live through this crisis, whatever it is, and you get to be part of creating that new world. Well, the new world, in a sense, already has to be being created right now. And so I hope you can see that these streams and everything that I'm talking about and thinking about is trying to say, what should this new rebirth of the world, what are the principles it should contain? And at least to me, the principles of how we relate to human beings and how we relate to all the other beings around us, whether animals, the earth, etc., and to kind of reality itself is far more important than those other physical concerns of weapons and bullets and even food and things like that. Those are important too, but not nearly as important as these other things of like how we relate to one another and to the natural world and those kinds of things. So anyway, that's the basis of what I wanted to share today. I'm glad I'm seeing some activity here from you on the chats, and yeah, let's talk about this a little more if you want to. But hopefully just have you thinking. These are not new things on this channel, but now we've just gotten more potent, let's say, pattern detecting tools. And this book, which I'm definitely going to work through the rest of it once it comes here, and we'll talk about it more if I think there's even more to talk about in it. But more than anything, I hope it gets you thinking of from where you're at, because we're all in a different situation, all in different stages of life and whatnot. Where do you fall into this story? Like even in these categories that are laid out in this book. Where do you and what do you need to do to try to ride this wave rather than get swept up by it? To anticipate the things that are coming before they come, and what do you need to do? Because again, it's different for every person. I can't tell you what you need to do. I can only kind of give you the principles for you to hopefully be able to look out, pay attention, and discern for yourself. Try to exercise that wisdom of saying, what do I need to do to anticipate, the coming turmoil and be ready for that, and how can I be a person that is there ready to live in and create the new world? How can I already be creating the new world at the same time, right? Okay, so let's go back and say, let's see, Farzad said, I haven't read the Bible, but your mention of the garden and the mountain made me think of this idea that Adam and Eve were in heaven before eating the apple that awakened their consciousness, and the fall from the highs. And since then, our collective mission as humanity has been to rebuild that ideal heaven down here on earth. So, and you say, I don't know if that is an existing idea in the Bible, but I hope it makes sense. Yeah, it completely is. Far as that, so the idea that's kind of, I think, developed, especially when you bring in Christianity as part of it, is that you start out in some sort of heavenly state, and the way I like to see it is that this happens in so many levels of reality. Reality is patterns within patterns within patterns. So think of a child growing up in their house. In general, in most normal houses, obviously there's exceptions, but in any kind of normal house, that child's existence for the first part of their life is pretty idyllic. It's pretty heavenly, right? They're living in the garden. Who's the garden for, in a symbolic sense, it's their mother. Even when they're, a little infant or just growing up, all their needs are taken care of without them having to exert any work, right? They're nourished from their mother's milk. They've got warmth and comfort. They're in a heavenly state, right, where everything's great. And little by little, as they grow up, they start learning, they start kind of falling into a more nasty world of bumps and bruises and scrapes and other people who are mean. And then they start realizing that they're an individual person separate from their mother and their family, and that they're kind of exposed in that sense, and that they make mistakes. They have the ability to hurt other people, and they do. And so by the time you're a teenager, that's a fallen child. They've fallen out of heaven, as it were. And so there's this sense of trying to get back to what it was like there as a child. This is a recurring pattern in history, that we're always trying to get back into the mode of being of a child. But of course, not caring so much of the more undeveloped nature of the child. So in as much as you start in paradise, you could say, and then fall away from it, well, then you're trying to get back, but in a more developed state. And that's kind of what I think you were leading at. And that's very much there in the Bible, that in this course of falling away and then trying to come back and ascend the mountain again, that hopefully when you ascend back, your time out there in the nasty world has made you stronger, has helped you develop and come back now, so that you're a more developed godlike being, right? But that's where you should say, okay, if that's a pattern, keep going on the pattern, because that's how these patterns work. They're waves, they're ongoing wave or cyclical patterns, and say, because that's happened to you in your life, right? Hopefully you've seen how at times, things were going good for you, and you were felt under control in life, like you developed and you were who you should be, and then things have fallen apart, right? And you feel bad about yourself, and that you're not being who you should be, and whatnot. And then hopefully you can put yourself back together and become and overcome your challenges and the things that are knocking you around in life, and hopefully now you put yourself back together and you're an even better person. But at that point you need to say, guess what's coming here? I need to now break myself down again and dissolve. And that's where you can start riding the pattern instead of letting it ride you or knock you over. You say, okay, things are going good, I need to break myself down. And I've tried to give examples from my life of how to try to do that. Things were going very well for me and my family. Living in Utah, money had been kind of conquered in a way and gotten flowing in cycles. And I said, we need to upset ourselves. And so that's where we went and traveled for a year, which is a very, you're uprooting yourself out of your home. There's all sorts of inconveniences of taking a family and traveling like that. But that was my way of saying, okay, I know life's going to knock us around anyway. Let's knock ourselves around. Let's knock ourselves out of place in a way that we can do more productively. And then, the same thing of why we're here in Montana. It's trying to anticipate changes that are already coming in society, and then, starting to ride the pattern so that you can kind of, again, be on top of that wave and use it in a productive way, but all the while saying, I've got to ride the wave. I've got to ride the wave up into creation. I've got to ride the wave of dissolving myself as well in order for this to work out properly, or else the natural forces of reality will do it anyway in ways that I might not be, that I might not like or be prepared for. So hope that makes sense. Joel says, do you have any example of this, how this pattern might play out during a normal day or week? Yeah, for sure. Like that's where, see how the pattern of a day is this same pattern, right? You wake up and it's a new creation. You're a new being. You're a refreshed being, and it's a new day of the world. And I don't know if you noticed, but the morning time is probably your best time to really order and create your life. You have an energy for it there in the morning to exercise and to put your life most in order and do those tasks. That's where a lot of people do their best writing and things like that. It's not the only time you can do it, but you try to knock out those things that are most difficult and that most kind of need to hold your life together. And then as the day goes on, you've got to eat lunch, and after that maybe there's kind of some lulls, you get tired, your metabolism happens, and there's times of unproductivity. that you're not productive in the days, and maybe you're grouchy at this time, and you have to get yourself some caffeine or something to kind of get yourself going again in the course of things, to try to stay doing something, being positive to people, treating people right. But as you get more towards the evening and as you get tired, things start breaking down again in your life, and it gets very hard to do those things, those tedious, hardworking things. It becomes harder to think clearly and stuff like that. Although there's nuances in this, because sometimes at night, in talking with my wife right before bedtime, for example, sometimes some of my best thoughts come there, because something there is in the process of dissolution or dissolving things. It can also shake up some new connections real quick. But in any case, you have to die every day, right? That's what happens. You have to die and go into a mostly unconscious state of death, where as science has studied sleep, there is some process of reordering and undoing all the ordering that you did in the day in ways, and kind of resetting things so that you can wake up alive again. And so again, that's a pattern, like the wave-like pattern that we said, and you try to ride that to the most effect. And then the same thing works with the course of a week, because right there at the beginning of the week is the best time to knock out those things in your refreshed way that you kind of have energy for, that are the more tedious things. Because as you go through the week, the more that you're just kind of being pulled in to this time of dissolving, the weekend, right? That you kind of look forward to. You look forward to getting out of the regular process of work and whatnot. And along the way, again, there's errors made along the way, things kind of build up, and your sins, you could say, that the ways that you're failing to do things in the way that you wanted to get your goals done and head out toward the process of life you do. And that's where we talked about this all on Monday. You can make that weekend into a period of sacred space, where you have a recreation and recreation, like on a Saturday, of getting out of just that pattern of work and kind of resetting yourself, so that Sunday, the first day of the week, if you're a Christian, you even have a ritual where you're kind of reintegrating the ideal. You're eating the ideal thing, Christ, putting them into you, and using that first day of the week, the Sunday, as the day of rebirth, where now you start out the pattern anew. So yes, that is how you already, there are those basic patterns, and how you can learn to start riding them. And boy, I'm not saying I do it well at all. I'm always trying to kind of figure out the weekend. For example, it's very easy on the weekend for me and my wife, to stay up way too late, right? In ways that already start us off in the next week kind of not as refreshed as we otherwise would be. So we wanted that dissolution of our regular routines, but we went too far with it, and it hurt us into the next week. We have to say, okay, next week we have to go to bed by 11 on a Friday, or else if we stay up till 1 again, things just didn't go well. And you have to kind of try to start seeing how to ride the pattern without being without it leading you to negative consequences, right? And so that's part of the process, and the wisdom of life is figuring out and paying attention and saying what's working and what's not and whatnot as you try to ride these patterns, right? Okay, so Martin called original sin. So that's one way of understanding that fall away. Christian says, Gary, who do you talk to about these things in ordinary life, and how? Well, you can tell I love to talk about them, and my primary talking partner is Sarah. And I'm so grateful that one of her skills, and it's funny how it's a skill, is that she is a good listener. And it's funny because she is so good at it that all of our family is in competition to have her listen to us. So everybody all day long is, Mom, oh, I just thought about this, and Mom, that. And then I want to come say, Sarah, I just had this idea I want to tell you about. And she has this, this talent of, not just sitting there silent, but actually giving you the feeling that you are being listened to. She does make comments and things like that to show that she understands or whatnot. And it's not like it's this big exchange where, she's also wanting to be the other intellectual side and say, oh yeah, let me debate that with you now, and here's a counterpoint and all this. It's not like that at all. She's just good at listening. So I'm very blessed that we can do that. And of course, I need to reciprocate. And usually it's like on our dates, that's my time that where she usually wants to talk about what's on her mind, which oftentimes is the kids. And it's just she needs to get out and unpack the things of what's going on in life and how the kids are developing and where we're failing and all this stuff. And she comes out, so I have to reciprocate. But that is definitely one of her skills. I have a brother that gives me this opportunity. When I found a running partner. I so much wish he was able to be here with me. His name's Weston, that I was running with for a while, who also was a good conversation partner, but it seemed like he was okay listening a lot of the time too. And so yeah, on our runs, maybe it would be kind of 2/3 me putting out all these ideas and 1/3 him listening. And it worked well because I think that was about the ratio. Of course, I still listened to him and his ideas, but it was about the ratio that worked, right? And so I guess what that's forming out as, and there's not a lot of people I can do this with. There's a lot of people that don't like to talk about these things in this way, and they'll tune out, and I can tell, and it's no fun to talk with them. I have a brother-in-law that was kind of a big blessing into the family because he's more of this intellectual type that loves to talk about this stuff, theology, American history, ideas, period, philosophy. And so whenever we're at a family get together, I'm like trying to find him to talk to. But on the whole, in life, there are not a lot of people that you can talk to like this. You have to kind of find them and cherish them, I guess you could say, wherever they are. So that's how that kind of plays out in my life. And I wish there were more. That's one of the reasons I do this. And one of the reasons really I wish, I love the fact that at least in the chat we can do this, but one of the reasons I also wish or hope over time to find more interactive ways that we can talk even more. And that, of course, that's difficult when it comes to numbers, which is why I was exploring Clubhouse and still, haven't exactly been convinced, but maybe there's something we could do as other platforms are kind of developing Clubhouse-like features. Hopefully that's something that we can figure out in some way. Okay, Christian says, have you ever heard that idea, hard times breed strong men make good times breed weak men make hard times? That I haven't heard that exactly in that way, but it rings so true and it fits so well onto this pattern that we said today. In my faith tradition, there's also a thing called the pride cycle that is brought out in as much in the Book of Mormon, if you've heard of that, which is this this account of peoples here in the Americas. That's one of the central kind of patterns of the whole narrative, is this cycle exactly of what you say, that the difficult times breed the best people and the strongest people that then develop a really good society and prosper. And then in that prosperity, that it just inevitably leads to weakness and weak people that eventually bring that society down. So it's such a fundamental pattern of reality, and you can see it in yourself too, right? That's what I was trying to say. These patterns, they definitely happen in ourselves, and so in as much as you can understand the pattern, you can learn to live with it better in more productive ways, instead of just saying, yep, I'm just bound to completely make a fool of myself and fall and create a lot of pain in the world in the process. Anticipating that, if things are going good, that's where I think you can anticipate that and say, okay, I'm going to choose right now the way to kind of start dissolving myself in a way that I think will even be productive in the biggest way, and least painful in the bad kind of pain. It's going to be a good kind of pain in order to do that. So thanks for bringing up that quote. That's a great one. Martin, you were kind of reaffirming the same thing from Christian. Father said, wow, that is so interesting and relatable as I've entered adulthood and trying to make sense of all the chaos in my teenage years. Yeah, you can see that's right there at that in-between stage where things kind of broke down. You were a child and you were probably pretty good at being a child. And then in the teenage years is this bridge stage of dissolving the child and trying to form the adult. And it's all kind of happening at once, right? And it's very difficult for a lot of people. and then hopefully at the end of it, you're somewhat of an adult, and you come out and you're like, yeah, I did it. But that's where you just got to start riding the cycle now, and you kind of, I've said it enough that you'll know what to do next. So Hermit says, will the end be soon? And that's where I hope you see that even in the Christian story, which kind of the Christian story started putting things into more of a beginning and an end, again, that linear notion of time. And so that's where, especially like evangelicals and stuff have this real obsession with the end of times and the end of the world. I hope I'm not misrepresenting that. Too bad. I'm not trying to, again, denigrate it or anything. It's just here in American society and our more linear way of thinking, it's very easy to see that, like, take the Christian story, it leads to this end, the end of the world and apocalypse and Armageddon and all this stuff. But of course, even in that story, there's a rebirth. It's the second coming of Christ in a time, a millennial period, a time of prosperity that comes after that. So even in that, and then after that, it's kind of like nobody really knows, or there's this notion that even after that period, then Satan gets released again, and there's going to be another great war at the end of that period, and then finally Satan will be bound forever. There's kind of that notion out in American Protestantism and even in my tradition. So you see, even in that, there's the recurring cycles again, and I've started to again stop seeing the world so much as those kinds of final events, but rather much more in just riding the cycles and aiming them towards always this better horizon, but realizing that actually that horizon keeps on receding. That was one thing I was hoping to talk about yesterday, I believe, in this notion that as we get into this pattern of riding the cycles, but also aiming towards something better and ideal out there towards us, in as much as we like embody the sage or use these examples. Yesterday we were talking about embodying the sage, like embodying Socrates, and you look back out at the world and you head out in the world to what you're looking for. Like, two things happen as you embody the sage. The world changes already, and as the world changes and you interact with it in this renewed way, the world changes you. And so these are difficult things to explain, but what I'm trying to get at is that in as much as you have any goals right now or any end states that you're heading towards, you probably notice that in the process of heading towards them, they kind of stop being the end state. You progress and transform in the process of moving towards a goal, such that even before you get there, already you've got other goals out out there before you. So to me, the nature of God, for example, is this ever increasing opening up thing. And the more that you head towards God, even like this notion of the more that you try to be like Christ, for example, if you're trying to be godly, well, in as much as you transform in that process, every time you look up, there's a different Christ out there because you have changed, and thus your definition of the ideal changes, and that's that is God there, right? The ever emerging, ideal that it seems boundless, and so it's you get in these cycles and you head out towards that ideal, but you realize that there's no end in the heading out. Like there's this inexhaustible fountain of progression in the world. And that's what I see bound up with like what we really should be after, like a pattern, a perennial pattern of progress, which recognizes the cyclical nature of reality and rides that wave perennially, towards an ever expanding universe and ever expanding notion of progress that you can never get to. And that's the good news. That means there's no end to things. So, getting back to will the end be soon? There is no end, right? I don't want there to be. You reach the end of something and things get boring. So rather, I just say the end of a cycle, the beginning of a new. That's how I see it. Okay, Christians, haha, Herman, he will go through all the comments for probably about 10 minutes. Why? And then Herman said, the end of the world. He said, sorry, it's okay. That's about. So hopefully I, showed you that there is an end of the world, and that's where, like, okay, so just answering, is there an end? Well, there are ends, right? And that's where this book is saying we're coming up on one. We're due to have a cataclysmic end to a story, or a story period right now, an end to a world, but coupled to the beginning of a new world. So yeah, the end is near. This thumbnail that I've got by my head, it's right. There is an end that seems to be near, an end of a cycle. At least that's the way it seems to me. Farzad said Clubhouse would be great. Yeah, I'm still looking into it. And of course, like so often happens, I think all these other platforms will just integrate those kind of features into it. I mean, it'd be great if in this kind of chat thing right here, then I could choose some of you to start talking and also streaming and stuff like that. I bet it will lead to that. And so we can just kind of, it shouldn't be too long before we're able to do that even on here. Christian said, we evangelicals love the end of the world. Yeah, Revelation and eschatology. And it's made me realize, Christian, that my, the Latter-day Saints, my tradition, it's the same thing. Like we have very much, we're very tied into Protestantism and a lot of evangelical ways of looking at the world. So again, I'm not saying that is a bad thing. What I like to do, just to be clear, I'm not saying that you're inferring that either. Because again, my own tradition has that. But I think that when you bring in the cyclical nature of things and you see how the story, suggests the beginning of something new anyway, and the nature of the new, of course, everybody has these descriptions. The millennium's going to be like this, and there's going to be this great period, and this event's going to happen, and that event's happen. Well, does it ever play out that way, right? Everybody thought they knew what the Messiah was going to be like, right? And then Christ comes, and it's not at all what people thought it was going to be like. So I think very much the odds are that's how the Christian story is even going to play out. All these things where people try to pinpoint exact things of how things are going to be, they're going to be wrong, right? So the better thing to do is to recognize the patterns. The patterns are the more real thing. That is more reality than any particular, physical manifestation of something in the world. The pattern is more real and it's more impactful on our lives. So that's the way I've come to see things, is to then look back at all the stories, look at the Christian story, look at all stories, and pull out the patterns, because that's what's most useful. And then you're not waiting for some specific thing to happen. You're always just looking to say, here's where I see that pattern playing out. We're in this place in the pattern, and here's how I can act within the pattern most productively. I've definitely changed over time in my thinking, and it's been an enhancement. That's probably the most important part of that. I think it's a better overall way of thinking about things, which even leads you, like the standard should always be, does it lead you to, like if you're a Christian, does it lead you to be more Christ-like or not? Or to like feel a greater sense of worship and awe towards the figure of Christ or not, and your desire to be like Christ. And when I look at the world this way, it enhances, it makes me want. It says Christ was like that, he wrote patterns and much more and whatnot. And anyway, you get the point. That it has only been an enhancement, not something that takes away. And you say, no one knows the day or the hour. Agree, you cannot nail it down in advance. Yes, exactly. That's another thing too, is that never take in that notion of Socratic wisdom, is that you're not wise. You're looking there, you're feeling, but you're always asking, I could be wrong. I need to kind of break down my way of thinking. Maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. That's so much a better place to be in. Farzad, the idea of cyclical pattern is also present in science, with the end being a black hole that sucks the universe into itself and the rebirth with yet another Big Bang. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because all of these kinds of patterns are showing up, again, embedded into reality, even in a scientific sense. So I'm glad you put that out, that's the way a lot of theoretical physicists are seeing what the whole universe is doing. But also, like a cognitive scientist, you'll find these patterns of formation and then dissolution in the very way that our brains function and our synapses fire and whatnot. And so yeah, that's where I say, like, it seems to be one that this is just a fundamental pattern of all reality, or two, maybe it's a fundamental pattern of our consciousness, and that's why as we look out and experience the world through our consciousness, we just see this pattern everywhere. Or three, it's both the nature of reality and our consciousness, in as much as they're kind of bound up in one and the same thing. And so yeah, any way you look at it, you're going to find it, even from a scientific perspective. Because also the other thing with science is that we're starting to realize, we used to look at science as if we were seeing the world like not through our eyes, from an objective standpoint. And the more that I've been looking at the latest philosophical ideas, scientific ideas, the more there's scientists and philosophers challenging that and saying, like, look, maybe there is no way of experiencing that other world. Because even the scientist, when you read the gauges of the dials and the instruments and all those things that you thought were outside of you, you're having to do it through your consciousness. Like, how do you know any of that is real, right? Reality is only experienceable through our consciousness, and unless you can explain your consciousness through your consciousness, which they haven't been able to do yet, you can't even hope to be able to get out of it, trying to explain the world outside of your own consciousness, if that makes any sense. But that's where what I'm trying to say is, it's all out there, yes, but it all comes back to us as being the people that think up these ideas and perceive them as well. So yeah, I think we've gotten sufficiently kind of esoteric, and somehow my camera stopped going, but I think I'm still transmitting sound. Anyways, it might be my camera that went off. So if you're just getting sound, that's probably a good indication that the powers and principalities of the world want me to sign off. And so I will do so. Thank you for joining me today. Hopefully I can convince Sarah to be on with me tomorrow about some topic that's, a little bit less abstract as these things tend to be, and just has a little bit different style about it. I always love the Fridays and the refreshing nature of them when she's on, so hopefully we can work that out. Otherwise, I will be working on the Interstellar video, making progress. It's tedious. I actually don't like to edit and these things, and that's why these things are hard for me, but I committed to do it, and I'm really looking forward to getting your reactions to this video essay that's tied into everything we just talked about today. So have a great rest of the day wherever you are in the world. This is Gary signing off from Mission Top.